Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first lecture for week 1, and this is chapter 1. Again, I'm Professor Powers, and we will hit some highlights of this chapter so that when you're going into your reading and doing your module study guide, that you'll just feel like you've kind of got some basis to start with. So let's go ahead and begin. All right, so one of the things you've probably heard about ever since maybe grade school in regards to life on this planet is that life is organized. Whether we're talking about the chemical side of life or whether we're talking about the biological side of life, we know that things on this planet are organized. Okay, so when we look into a cell proper, we can start to look at the chemistry. So atoms are the basic building blocks of molecules, and molecules make up bigger ones called macromolecules. Macromolecules are going to work together to form various chemicals that are making up our cells. Okay, now the cell itself is the basic building block of life. Anything below the cell is essentially chemistry. And if you go down low enough, subatomic particles and so on, we're talking about physics. But the first identified kind of life that we can pinpoint on the planet is a cell. So this is the smallest structural and functional unit of an organism. Now, some organisms, like some of my favorite things, paramecium, amoeba, diatoms, lots of other algae, are actually just single cell. They are unicellular, and they live their entire life as one cell. Sometimes they do something a little different if they're trying to reproduce, so that one cell can divide by basic cell division and make two. Sometimes they can say, hey, there's an attractive desmid. I think I want to maybe exchange my genetic material with you. So usually they stay unicellular, but things can get a little different when they're starting to think about reproducing. Now for the rest of us, plants, animals, fungi, protists, we all fall into what we call multicellular organisms. So do I have a cell? Yes, in fact I have like 100 trillion cells. Does my dog have more than one cell? Of course, my dog has is multicellular. So the bigger the organism is, you're normally thinking to yourself, they must be multicellular. Now, what separates us from colonies, for example, there is a type of algae called Volvox. Volvox is made up of lots of different cells, but those cells are pretty much the same. Do they cooperate with one another? Yes, sort of, but they're also like all for one and one for all. They're looking out for each cell themselves. When you become a colony, it means essentially by convenience, maybe more than convenience, you are associated with other cells and you are making up the organism. The difference is between a colony and a multicellular organism is the degree of differentiation. Okay, so we look at the next bullet on the list. Multicellular organisms have 100 trillion cells, or 100 million cells, or 100,000 cells, and those cells are organized into tissues. So a tissue is a specialized group of cells that are working together to perform a function. So muscle tissue, nervous tissue, connective tissue, okay? So the colonial organisms are still unicellular because they don't have tissues. They are not differentiating and becoming more complex. Okay, so when we're starting to build on this thinking that life on this planet is organized, then we can take a look at this figure. So we talked about atoms make up molecules, molecules make up a cell. Now we're talking about a living thing. Cells come together to make tissues. Now, again, for multicellular organisms, for most of us, those tissues are going to become organized into organs. Yes, in fact, there are animals on the planet. One that comes to mind, the cnidarians, which include jellyfish. The cnidarians are stuck at the tissue level, okay? But for most animals on the planet, most plants on the planet, most fungi on the planet, those tissues are organized into organs, okay? So those organs now can cooperate with other organs to form an organ system. So that's one of the things we'll talk about this semester, the nervous system and what organs are involved. The digestive system, what organs are involved. Okay, organ systems come together to make you the organism. So to be multicellular, your cells differentiate into tissues. Tissues cooperate to make organs. Organs work together to form this higher functioning called organ systems. So you yourself are this multicellular organism. Now, when we take a look at the planet, and this is my favorite thing, when we take a look at the planet out there and you see all these kinds of plants and some animals and whatnot, and you're just like, okay, there's the Earth. When I look out at nature, I see, okay, well, there's different organisms on the planet, and that makes biodiversity. Those organisms aren't alone, usually. They are cooperating in a population. So we've had a number of house wrens build nests near our home, and we can watch them build their nests and have their young and feed their young. So there's a population of house wrens associated with where we live. Now, we don't only have house wrens, we have blue jays, we have American robins, we have some Baltimore Orioles, we've had fox, we have all the things, right? And so now we're starting to look at a community. So a community is different species and the populations thereof, all interacting in a particular space and time. So what you see out in your yard is this wonderful association of organisms that really need each other, okay? Now, when we broaden ourselves and maybe we put our drone up and we're kind of looking at the landscape and seeing how the landscape changes. Maybe we're heading a little bit north from where I live and we're taking a look at the Finger Lakes. Now we're looking at an ecosystem. Ecosystems are defined by the non-living part of the planet. So we've been talking about the living part, from the cell all the way to the community. Well, the ecosystem is going to take into account the community, but it's going to take into account the non-living part, the abiotic part. So this is altitude, it's temperature, it's moisture, it's bedrock, it's season. So there's all these things that are going to determine or help characterize what an ecosystem is. Now, if we even zoom out even more, we take a look at the Earth, we're going to see that the Earth has a living layer. It is a thin layer that wraps around, and we call it the biosphere. So it doesn't take going up into the atmosphere very far. Just go up in a helicopter, an airplane, a hot air balloon. There's going to be a point when there's no more birds, right? So birds are those organisms that can likely get the highest up in the atmosphere than anything else. And so we see that this living layer of the Earth is rather thin. Okay, so if you want to pause the slide and get some definitions, you can do that. Or, I'm sorry, pause my video. I only have 15 minutes for these videos, so I tend to kind of go a little quick. Okay. In this chapter and throughout this course, you're going to hear this word homeostasis brought up again and again and again and again. Okay? Homeostasis, this ability to maintain a stable internal environment. Well, let me also tell you, nature is trying to maintain homeostasis. It's a little out of whack. But homeostasis is a theme in biology. So for organisms like yourself, we are trying to maintain a stable internal environment. What happens when that stable internal environment is not being maintained means that we might have a disorder, a dysfunction, or a disease, okay? So for example, one of the classic things that we talk about is maintaining your blood sugar. There is a normal, stable range of blood sugar values. So 70 milligrams per deciliter of glucose in the blood, up to about a 110, okay? So that's the stable range. Now, we don't just have one value all the time. It fluctuates within the stable range. Now, do we sometimes go outside the stable range? Sure. Did we decide to eat, sweet tarts for breakfast and a Monster? Maybe. And so what happens then? So essentially, we start to test the boundaries of homeostasis by tweaking our blood sugar. And when we do that, certainly your body has a way to psych you out, take away your, sugar buzz. And the way that it does that is it is going to crank out more and more insulin. So the insulin is going to lower that blood sugar. Now, on the other end of it, sometimes what happens to me is I wait a little too long to eat, and I get to where, I can't even think of words. I can't even talk. And, my family goes, oh, okay, she probably needs, you need to eat, Mom. Okay, oh, yeah, okay. But when your blood sugar gets really low, then you're going to have these symptoms that tell you, okay, we need to replenish the sugar. We have depleted all that we had on board. And that onboard form of carbohydrates called glycogen. We don't immediately tap into the fat. So Homeostasis, maintaining a stable internal environment. There'll be lots and lots of examples. The last example here, body temperature is maintained with a narrow range of values. So absolutely, our circulatory system, our connective tissue, our nervous systems are all going to try to keep our body temperature within a stable range. But if you go outside and it's like, -5 out and you got flip-flops on and shorts and no hat and no gloves and you're shoveling snow, yes, in fact, you might get really, really cold and you might get some hypothermia and you might get, I forget what it's called, I guess, can't think, little frostbite, there you go, on your toes, your nose, and your fingers. Okay, so the other thing that we want to think about is how life is organized on the planet. Everything is organized, right? It starts with hierarchies. So you probably have experience with hierarchies in some form or fashion. It may just be how you organize your documents on your computer. But when we think about life on the planet, we have 3 large domains of life: the bacteria, the archaebacteria, and the eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are those that have a nucleus in their cell and contains the DNA in the nucleus. Okay. Prokaryotes, which include both the bacteria and the archaebacteria, they are only single-celled organisms and they have free-floating DNA in their cytoplasm. So eukaryotes already have like one step above. They've got their DNA not floating in the cytoplasm, but instead in a membrane-bound structure. Now, there are single-celled prokaryotes, and that's kind of where they're stuck. Are there some colonial ones? Yes. Eukaryotes, we have single-cell ones, we have colonial ones, and we have multicellular ones. But the operative difference is essentially how they store their DNA. There are a few other differences you'll discover in your study guide. So this starts to show us the evolution of life on the planet. So when we go back and we analyze the genetic relatedness or the evolutionary relatedness of these 3 domains of life, we see that the bacteria and the archaea are more similar. Now, when we take a look at us, the eukaryotes, our cells are more similar to the archaea or the archaebacterial cells. So we can see that we have that relatedness, and then you have these 4 major groups of eukaryotes: the protists, single-celled and colonial things, generally live in the water but can be disease-causing and so on. We've got our plants, my favorite one, fungi, my second favorite one, and animals, okay, animals. So here we see this detailed out for you. So these are our kingdoms of life: plant kingdom or kingdom Plantae, kingdom fungi, kingdom Animalia, kingdom Protista. Okay, the protist kingdom is a bit haphazard because historically, when evolutionary biologists didn't know where something belonged in the scheme of things, in the evolutionary scheme of things, and before we had DNA technology where we could actually use the DNA to determine the relatedness, that it meant we had to figure out what to do with it. So there was a whole lot of things that were thrown into the kingdom Protista. So there's no real clear evolutionary lineages of that kingdom as of now. So hence they've essentially erected these groups called supergroups that explain the relatedness, or you can see the evolutionary lineages a bit better. So here's some lovely pictures just so you some diversity. You can pause, look at my slide. Just make sure you're familiar with some examples of each of these. Okay, ringworms aren't worms. It's actually fungus growing in a ring on your skin. Okay. Scientific method. All of you have heard about the scientific method, and it really starts with being hyper observant. So you start noticing, like, maybe there's a connection, maybe there's some trends going on. And from those observations, you form a statement about the possible explanation of your observation. Then we design an experiment. There's a whole field, master's degree, you can take it. Experimental design. You got to appropriately test the hypothesis, and so many people don't. It's bad. When you get your results, you're going to analyze data. You're going to use statistics for that. You're going to look for significant differences. And then what are you going to do? You're going to take a look at these results and determine, do you support your hypothesis or do you reject it? So there's a little bit more about testing the hypothesis. You can look at that. little figure, and now it's time to go. So I'll see you next time.